The Histories of Herodotus,
Continued. Disc 2.
The fifth book, entitled Terpsichore. The Persians left behind by King Darius in Europe, who had Megabazus for their general, reduced before any other Hellespontine state the people of Perinthus, who had no mind to become subjects of the king. Now the Perinthians had ere this been roughly handled by another nation, the Paeonians. For the Paeonians, from about the Strymon, were once bidden by an oracle to make war upon the Perinthians, and if these latter, when the camps faced one another, challenged them by name to fight, then to venture on a battle, but if otherwise, not to make the hazard. The Paeonians followed the advice. Now the men of Perinthus drew out to meet them in the skirts of their city, and a threefold single combat was fought on challenge given. Man to man, and horse to horse, and dog to dog was the strife waged, and the Perinthians, winners of 2 combats out of the 3, in their joy had raised the paean, when the Paeonians, struck by the thought that this was what the oracle had meant, passed the word one to another, saying, "Now of a surety has the oracle been fulfilled for us. Now our work begins." Then the Paeonians set upon the Perinthians in the midst of their paean, and defeated them utterly, leaving but few of them alive. Such was the affair of the Paeonians, which happened a long time previously. At this time the Perinthians, after a brave struggle for freedom, were overcome by numbers, and yielded to Megabazus and his Persians. After Perinthus had been brought under, Megabazus led his host through Thrace, subduing to the dominion of the king all the towns and all the nations of those parts. For the king's command to him was that he should conquer Thrace. The Thracians are the most powerful people in the world, except of course the Indians, and if they had one head, or were agreed among themselves, it's my belief that their match could not be found anywhere, and that they would very far surpass all other nations. But such union is impossible for them, and there are no means of ever bringing it about. Herein therefore consists their weakness. The Thracians bear many names in the different regions of their country, but all of them have like usages in every respect, except only the Getae, the Trauci, and those who dwell above the people of Crestum. Now the manners and customs of the Getae, who believe in their immortality, I've already spoken of. The Trauci in all else resemble the other Thracians, but have customs at births and deaths, which I'll now describe. When a child is born, all its kindred sit round about it in a circle and weep for the woes it will have to undergo now that it's come into the world, making mention of every ill that falls to the lot of humankind. When, on the other hand, a man has died, they bury him with laughter and rejoicings, and say that now he's free from a host of sufferings and enjoys the completest happiness. The Thracians who live above the Crestonians observe the following customs. Each man among them has several wives, and no sooner does a man die than a sharp contest ensues among the wives upon the question which of them all the husband loved most tenderly. The friends of each eagerly plead on her behalf, and she to whom the honour is adjudged, after receiving the praises both of men and women, is slain over the grave by the hand of her next of kin, and then buried with her husband. The others are sorely grieved, for nothing is considered such a disgrace. The Thracians who do not belong to these tribes have the customs which follow. They sell their children to traders. On their maidens they keep no watch, but allow them to enjoy any men they wished, while on the conduct of their wives they keep a most strict watch. Brides are purchased of their parents for large sums of money. Tattooing among them marks noble birth, and the want of it low birth. To be idle is accounted the most honourable thing, and to be a tiller of the ground the most dishonourable. To live by war and plunder is of all things the most glorious. These are the most remarkable of their customs. The gods which they worship are but 3, Ares, Dionysus, and Artemis. Their kings, however, unlike the rest of the citizens, worship Hermes more than any other god, always swearing by his name, and declaring that they are themselves sprung from him. Their wealthy ones are buried in the following fashion. The body is laid out for 3 days, and during this time they kill victims of all kinds, and feast upon them, after first bewailing the departed. Then they either burn the body or else bury it in the ground. Lastly, they raise a mound over the grave and hold games of all sorts, wherein the single combat is awarded the highest prize. Such is the mode of burial among the Thracians. As regards the region lying north of this country, no one can say with any certainty what men inhabit it. It appears that you no sooner cross the Ister than you enter on an interminable wilderness. The only people of whom I can hear as dwelling beyond the Ister are the race named Sigynni, who wear, they say, a dress like the Medes, and have horses which are covered entirely with a coat of shaggy hair 5 fingers in length. They are a small breed, flat-nosed and not strong enough to bear men on their backs, but when yoked to chariots they're among the swiftest known, which is the reason why the people of that country use chariots. Their borders reach down almost to the Eneti upon the Adriatic Sea, and they call themselves colonists of the Medes. But how they can be colonists of the Medes, I, for my part, can't imagine. Still, nothing is impossible in the long lapse of ages. Sigynni is the name which the Ligurians, who dwell above Massilia, give to traders, while among the Cyprians the word means spears. According to the account which the Thracians give, the country beyond the Ister is possessed by bees, on account of which it's impossible to penetrate farther. But in this they seem to me to say what has no likelihood, for it's certain that those creatures are very impatient of cold. I rather believe that it's on account of the cold that the regions which lie under the Bear are without inhabitants. Such then are the accounts given of this country, the sea coast, whereof Megabazus was now employed in subjecting to the Persians. King Darius had no sooner crossed the Hellespont and reached Sardis than he bethought himself of the good deed of Histiaeus the Milesian, and the good counsel of the Mytilenean Coes. He therefore sent for both of them to Sardis, and bade them each crave a boon at his hands. Now Histiaeus, as he was already king of Miletus, didn't make request for any government besides, but asked Darius to give him Myrcinus of the Edonians, where he wished to build him a city. Such was the choice that Histiaeus made. Coes, on the other hand, as he was a mere burgher and not a king, requested the sovereignty of Mytilene. Both alike obtained their requests, and straightway betook themselves to the places which they had chosen. It chanced in the meantime that King Darius saw a sight which determined him to bid Megabazus remove the Paeonians from their seats in Europe and transport them to Asia. There were 2 Paeonians, Pygries and Mantiaes, whose ambition it was to obtain the sovereignty over their countrymen. As soon therefore as ever Darius crossed into Asia, these men came to Sardis and brought with them their sister, who was a tall and beautiful woman. Having so done, they waited till a day came when the king sat in state in the suburb of the Lydians, and then, dressing their sister in the richest gear they could, sent her to draw water for them. She bore a pitcher upon her head, and with one arm led a horse, while all the way as she went she span flax. Now as she passed by where the king was, Darius took notice of her, for it was neither like the Persians nor the Lydians nor any of the dwellers in Asia to do as she did. Darius accordingly noted her and ordered some of his guard to follow her steps and watch to see what she would do with the horse. So the spearmen went, and the woman, when she came to the river, first watered the horse, and then, filling the pitcher, came back the same way she had gone, with the pitcher of water upon her head, and the horse dragging upon her arm, while she still kept twirling the spindle. King Darius was full of wonder, both at what they who had watched the woman told him, and at what he had himself seen. So he commanded that she should be brought before him. And the woman came, and with her appeared her brothers, who had been watching everything a little way off. Then Darius asked them of what nation the woman was, and the young men replied that they were Paeonians, and she was their sister. Darius rejoined by asking who the Paeonians were, and in what part of the world they lived, and further, what business had brought the young men to Sardis. Then the brothers told him they had come to put themselves under his power, and Paeonia was a country upon the river Strymon, and the Strymon was at no great distance from the Hellespont. The Paeonians, they said, were colonists of the Teucrians from Troy. When they had thus answered his questions, Darius asked if all the women of their country worked so hard. Then the brothers eagerly answered yes, for this was the very object with which the whole thing had been done. So Darius wrote letters to Megabazus, the commander whom he had left behind in Thrace, and ordered him to remove the Paeonians from their own land and bring them into his presence, men, women, and children. And straightway a horseman took the message and rode at speed to the Hellespont, and crossing it gave the paper to Megabazus. Then Megabazus, as soon as he had read it, and procured guides from Thrace, made war upon Paeonia. Now when the Paeonians heard that the Persians were marching against them, they gathered themselves together and marched down to the sea coast, since they thought the Persians would endeavour to enter their country on that side. Here then they stood in readiness to oppose the army of Megabazus. But the Persians, who knew that they had collected and were gone to keep guard at the pass near the sea, got guides, and taking the inland route before the Paeonians were aware, poured down upon their cities, from which the men had all marched out, and finding them empty, easily got possession of them. Then the men, when they heard that all their towns were taken, scattered this way and that to their homes, and gave themselves up to the Persians. And so these tribes of the Paeonians, to wit, the Syro-Paeonians, the Paeoclians, and all the others as far as Lake Prasius, were torn from their seats and led away into Asia. They, on the other hand, who dwelt about Mount Pangaium in the country of the Tobares, the Agrianians and the Odomantians, and they likewise who inhabited Lake Prasius, were not conquered by Megabazus. He sought indeed to subdue the dwellers upon the lake, but couldn't effect his purpose. Their manner of living is the following. Platforms, supported upon tall piles, stand in the middle of the lake, which are approached from the land by a single narrow bridge. At the first, the piles which bear up the platforms were fixed in their places by the whole body of the citizens, but since that time the custom which has prevailed about fixing them is this. They are brought from a hill called Obilus, and every man drives in 3 for each wife that he marries. Now the men have all many wives apiece, and this is the way in which they live. Each has his own hut, wherein he dwells, upon one of the platforms, and each has also a trapdoor giving access to the lake beneath. And their wont is to tie their baby children by the foot with a string to save them from rolling into the water. They feed their horses and their other beasts upon fish, which abound in the lake to such a degree that a man has only to open his trapdoor and to let down a basket by a rope into the water, and then to wait a very short time, when he draws it up quite full of them. The fish are of 2 kinds, which they call the paprax and the tilon. The Paeonians, therefore, at least such of them as had been conquered, were led away into Asia. As for Megabazus, he no sooner brought the Paeonians under than he sent into Macedonia an embassy of Persians, choosing for the purpose the 7 men of most note in all the army after himself. These persons were to go to Amyntas and require him to give earth and water to King Darius. Now there's a very short cut from the Lake Prasius across to Macedonia. Quite close to the lake is the mine which yielded afterwards a talent of silver a day to Alexander, and from this mine you have only to cross the mountain called Disorum to find yourself in the Macedonian territory. So the Persians sent upon this errand, when they reached the court and were brought into the presence of Amyntas, required him to give earth and water to King Darius. And Amyntas not only gave them what they asked, but also invited them to come and feast with him, after which he made ready the board with great magnificence and entertained the Persians in right friendly fashion. Now when the meal was over, and they were all set to the drinking, the Persians said, "Dear Macedonian, We Persians have a custom when we make a great feast to bring with us to the board our wives and concubines and make them sit beside us. Now then, as thou hast received us so kindly and feasted us so handsomely, and givest moreover earth and water to King Darius, do also after our custom in this matter. Then Amyntas answered, O Persians, we have no such custom as this, but with us men and women are kept apart. Nevertheless, since you, who are our lords, wish it, this also shall be granted to you. When Amyntas had thus spoken, he bade some go and fetch the women. And the women came at his call, and took their seats in a row over against the Persians. Then when the Persians saw that the women were fair and comely, they spoke again to Amyntas, and said that what had been done was not wise, for it had been better for the women not to have come at all, than to come in this way, and not to sit by their sides, but to remain over against them, the torment of their eyes. So Amyntas was forced to bid the women sit side by side with the Persians. The women did as he ordered, and then the Persians, who had drunk more than they ought, began to put their hands on them. And one even tried to give the woman next him a kiss. King Amyntas saw, but he kept silence, although sorely grieved, for he greatly feared the power of the Persians. Alexander, however, Amyntas' son, who was likewise there and witnessed the whole, being a young man and unacquainted with suffering, couldn't any longer restrain himself. He therefore, full of wrath, spoke thus to Amyntas, Dear father, thou art old, and should spare thyself. Rise up from table and go take thy rest. Do not stay out the drinking. I will remain with the guests, and give them all that is fitting. Amyntas, who guessed that Alexander would play some wild prank, made answer, Dear son, thy words sound to me as those of one who is well nigh on fire, and I perceive thou sendest me away that thou mayst do some wild deed. I beseech thee, make no commotion about these men, lest thou bring us all to ruin, but bear to look calmly on what they do. For myself I will e'en withdraw, as thou biddest me. Amyntas, when he had thus besought his son, went out. And Alexander said to the Persians, Look on these ladies as your own, dear strangers, all or any of them. Only tell us your wishes. But now, as the evening wears, and I see you have all had wine enough, let them, if you please, retire, and when they have bathed, they shall come back again. To this the Persians agreed, and Alexander, having got the women away, sent them off to the harem, and made ready in their room an equal number of beardless youths, whom he dressed in the garments of the women, and then, arming them with daggers, brought them in to the Persians, saying as he introduced them, Methinks, dear Persians, that your entertainment has fallen short in nothing. We have set before you all that we had ourselves in store, and all that we could anywhere find to give you. And now, to crown the whole, we make over to you our sisters and our mothers, that you may perceive yourselves to be entirely honored by us, even as you deserve to be, and also that you may take back word to the king who sent you here, that there was one man, a Greek, the satrap of Macedonia, by whom you were both feasted and lodged handsomely. So speaking, Alexander set by the side of each Persian one of those whom he had called Macedonian women, but who were, in truth, men. And these men, when the Persians began to be rude, dispatched them with their daggers. So the ambassadors perished by this death, both they and also their followers. For the Persians had brought a great train with them, carriages and attendants and baggage of every kind, all of which disappeared at the same time as the men themselves. Not very long afterwards the Persians made strict search for their lost embassy. But Alexander, with much wisdom, hushed up the business, bribing those sent on the errand, partly with money and partly with the gift of his own sister, Gygia, whom he gave in marriage to Bubares, a Persian, the chief leader of the expedition which came in search of the lost men. Thus the death of these Persians was hushed up, and no more was said of it. Now that the men of this family are Greeks, sprung from Perdiccas, as they themselves affirm, is a thing which I can declare of my own knowledge, and which I will hereafter make plainly evident. That they are so has been already adjudged by those who managed the Pan-Hellenic contest at Olympia. For when Alexander wished to contend in the games, and had come to Olympia with no other view, the Greeks who were about to run against him would have excluded him from the contest, saying that Greeks only were allowed to contend, and not barbarians. But Alexander proved himself to be an Argive, and was distinctly adjudged a Greek, after which he entered the lists for the foot race, and was drawn to run in the first pair. Thus was this matter settled. Megabazus, having reached the Hellespont with the Paeonians, crossed it and went up to Sardis. He had become aware, while in Europe, that Histiaeus the Milesian was raising a wall at Myrcinus, the town upon the Strymon, which he had obtained from King Darius as his guerdon for keeping the bridge. No sooner, therefore, did he reach Sardis with the Paeonians than he said to Darius, "What mad thing is this that thou hast done, sire, to let a Greek, a wise man and a shrewd, get hold of a town in Thrace, a place too where there is abundance of timber fit for shipbuilding, and oars in plenty, and mines of silver, and about which are many dwellers, both Greek and barbarian, ready enough to take him for their chief, and by day and night to do his bidding? I pray thee, make this man cease his work, if thou wouldst not be entangled in a war with thine own followers. Stop him, but with a gentle message, only bidding him to come to thee. Then, when thou once hast him in thy power, be sure thou take good care that he never get back to Greece again." With these words Megabazus easily persuaded Darius, who thought he had shown true foresight in this matter. Darius therefore sent a messenger to Myrcinus, who said, "These be the words of the king to thee, O Histiaeus. I have looked to find a man well affectioned towards me, and towards my greatness, and I have found none whom I can trust like thee. Thy deeds, and not thy words only, have proved thy love for me. Now then, since I have a mighty enterprise in hand, I pray thee, come to me, that I may show thee what I purpose." Histiaeus, when he heard this, put faith in the words of the messenger, and as it seemed to him a grand thing to be the king's counsellor, he straightway went up to Sardis. Then Darius, when he was come, said to him, "Dear Histiaeus, hear why I have sent for thee. No sooner did I return from Scythia and lose thee out of my sight, than I longed, as I have never longed for aught else, to behold thee once more, and to interchange speech with thee. Right sure I am, there is nothing in all the world so precious as a friend, who is at once wise and true, both which thou art, as I have had good proof in what thou hast already done for me. Now then, 'tis well thou art come, for look, I have an offer to make to thee. Let go Miletus and thy newly founded town in Thrace, and come with me up to Susa. Share all that I have, live with me, and be my counsellor." When Darius had thus spoken, he made Artaphernes, his brother by the father's side, governor of Sardis, and taking Histiaeus with him, went up to Susa. He left as general of all the troops upon the sea-coast Otanes, son of Sisamnes, whose father King Cambyses slew and flayed, because that he, being of the number of the royal judges, had taken money to give an unrighteous sentence. Therefore Cambyses slew and flayed Sisamnes, and cutting his skin into strips, stretched them across the seat of the throne whereon he had been wont to sit when he heard causes. Having so done, Cambyses appointed the son of Sisamnes to be judge in his father's room, and made him never forget in what way his seat was cushioned. Accordingly, this Otanes, who had occupied so strange a throne, became the successor of Megabazus in his command, and took first of all Byzantium and Chalcedon, then Antandrus in the Troas, and next Lamponium. This done, he borrowed ships of the Lesbians, and took Lemnos and Imbrus, which were still inhabited by the Pelasgians. Now the Lemnians stood on their defence, and fought gallantly. But when they were brought low in course of time, such as outlived the struggle were placed by the Persians under the government of Lycoritus, the brother of the Myandrius, who was tyrant of Samos. This Lycoritas died afterwards in his government. The cause which Otanes alleged for conquering and enslaving all these nations was that some had refused to join the king's army against Scythia, while others had molested the host on its return. Such were the exploits which Otanes performed in his command. Afterwards, but for no long time, there was a respite from suffering. Then from Naxos and Miletus troubles gathered anew about Ionia. Now Naxos at this time surpassed all the other islands in prosperity, and Miletus had reached the height of her power and was the glory of Ionia. But previously, for 2 generations, the Milesians had suffered grievously from civil disorders, which were composed by the Parians, whom the Milesians chose before all the rest of the Greeks to rearrange their government. Now the way in which the Parians healed their differences was the following. A number of the chief Parians came to Miletus, and when they saw in how ruined a condition the Milesians were, they said they would like first to go over their country. So they went through all Milesia, and on their way, whenever they saw in the waste and desolate country any land that was well farmed, they took down the names of the owners in their tablets. And having thus gone through the whole region, and obtained after all but few names, they called the people together on their return to Miletus, and made proclamation that they gave the government into the hands of those persons whose lands they had found well farmed. For they thought it likely, they said, that the same persons who had managed their own affairs well would likewise conduct aright the business of the state. The other Milesians, who in time past had been at variance, they placed under the rule of these men. Thus was the Milesian government set in order by the Parians. It was, however, from the 2 cities above mentioned that troubles began now to gather again about Ionia, and this is the way in which they arose. Certain of the rich men had been banished from Naxos by the commonalty, and upon their banishment had fled to Miletus. Aristagoras, son of Molpagoras, the nephew and likewise the son-in-law of Histiaeus, son of Lysagoras, who was still kept by Darius at Susa, happened to be regent of Miletus at the time of their coming. For the kingly power belonged to Histiaeus, but he was at Susa when the Naxians came. Now these Naxians had in times past been bond friends of Histiaeus, and so on their arrival at Miletus they addressed themselves to Aristagoras and begged him to lend them such aid as his ability allowed, in hopes thereby to recover their country. Then Aristagoras, considering with himself that if the Naxians should be restored by his help he would be lord of Naxos, put forward the friendship with Histiaeus to cloak his views, and spoke as follows. I can't engage to furnish you with such a power as were needful to force you against their will upon the Naxians who hold the city, for I know they can bring into the field 8,000 bucklers, and have also a vast number of ships of war. But I will do all that lies in my power to get you some aid, and I think I can manage it in this way. Artaphernes happens to be my friend. Now he's a son of Hystaspes and brother to King Darius. All the sea coast of Asia is under him, and he has a numerous army and numerous ships. I think I can prevail on him to do what we require. When the Naxians heard this, they empowered Aristagoras to manage the matter for them as well as he could, and told him to promise gifts and pay for the soldiers, which they said they would readily furnish, since they had great hope that the Naxians, so soon as they saw them returned, would render them obedience, and likewise the other islanders, for at that time not one of the Cyclades was subject to King Darius. So Aristagoras went to Sardis, and told Artaphernes that Naxos was an island of no great size, but a fair land and fertile, lying near Ionia, and containing much treasure and a vast number of slaves. Make war then upon this land, he said, and reinstate the exiles, For if thou wilt do this, first of all, I have very rich gifts in store for thee, besides the cost of the armament, which it's fair that we who are the authors of the war should pay. And secondly, thou wilt bring under the power of the king not only Naxos, but the other islands which depend on it, as Paros, Andros, and all the rest of the Cyclades. And when thou hast gained these, thou mayest easily go on against Euboea, which is a large and wealthy island, not less in size than Cyprus, and very easy to bring under. 100 ships were quite enough to subdue the whole. The other answered, Truly thou art the author of a plan which may much advantage the house of the king, and thy counsel is good in all points except the number of the ships. Instead of 100, 200 shall be at thy disposal when the spring comes, but the king himself must first approve the undertaking. When Aristagoras heard this, he was greatly rejoiced, and went home in good heart to Miletus. And Artaphernes, after he had sent a messenger to Susa to lay the plans of Aristagoras before the king, and received his approval of the undertaking, made ready a fleet of 200 triremes, and a vast army of Persians and their confederates. The command of these he gave to a Persian named Megabates, who belonged to the house of the Achaemenids, being nephew both to himself and to King Darius. It was to a daughter of this man that Pausanias, the Lacedaemonian, the son of Cleombrotus, if at least there be any truth in the tale, was affianced many years afterwards, when he conceived the desire of becoming tyrant of Greece. Artaphernes, now having named Megabates to the command, sent forward the armament to Aristagoras. Megabates set sail, and touching at Miletus, took on board Aristagoras with the Ionian troops and the Naxians, after which he steered, as he gave out, for the Hellespont. And when he reached Chios, he brought the fleet to anchor off Caucasa, being minded to wait there for a north wind, and then sail straight to Naxos. The Naxians, however, were not to perish at this time, and so the following events were brought about. As Megabates went his rounds to visit the watches on board the ships, he found a Myndian vessel upon which there was none set. Full of anger at such carelessness, he bade his guards to seek out the captain, one Scylax by name, and thrusting him through one of the holes in the ship's side, to fasten him there in such a way that his head might show outside the vessel, while his body remained within. When Scylax was thus fastened, one went and informed Aristagoras that Megabates had bound his Myndian friend, and was entreating him shamefully. So he came and asked Megabates to let the man off, but the Persian refused him, whereupon Aristagoras went himself and set Scylax free. When Megabates heard this, he was still more angry than before, and spoke hotly to Aristagoras. Then the latter said to him, What hast thou to do with these matters? Wert thou not sent here by Artaphernes to obey me, and to sail whithersoever I ordered? Why dost meddle so? Thus spake Aristagoras. The other, in high dudgeon at such language, waited till the night, and then dispatched a boat to Naxos to warn the Naxians of the coming danger. Now the Naxians up to this time had not had any suspicion that the armament was directed against them. As soon, therefore, as the message reached them, forthwith they brought within their walls all that they had in the open field, and made themselves ready against a siege by provisioning their town both with food and drink. Thus was Naxos placed in a posture of defence, and the Persians, when they crossed the sea from Chios, found the Naxians fully prepared for them. However, they sat down before the place and besieged it for 4 whole months. When at length all the stores which they had brought with them were exhausted, and Aristagoras had likewise spent upon the siege no small sum from his private means, and more was still needed to ensure success, the Persians gave up the attempt, and first building certain forts, wherein they left the banished Naxians, withdrew to the mainland, having utterly failed in their undertaking. And now Aristagoras found himself quite unable to make good his promises to Artaphernes. Nay, he was even hard-pressed to meet the claims whereto he was liable for the pay of the troops, and at the same time his fear was great, lest, owing to the failure of the expedition and his own quarrel with Megabates, he should be ousted from the government of Miletus. These manifold alarms had already caused him to contemplate raising a rebellion, when the man with the marked head came from Susa, bringing him instructions on the part of Histiaeus to revolt from the king. For Histiaeus, when he was anxious to give Aristagoras orders to revolt, could find but one safe way, as the roads were guarded, of making his wishes known, which was by taking the trustiest of his slaves, shaving all the hair from off his head, and then pricking letters upon the skin and waiting till the hair grew again. Thus accordingly he did, and as soon as ever the hair was grown, he dispatched the man to Miletus, giving him no other message than this: When thou art come to Miletus, bid Aristagoras shave thy head, and look thereon. Now the marks on the head, as I've already mentioned, were a command to revolt. All this Histiaeus did because it irked him greatly to be kept at Susa, and because he had strong hopes that if troubles broke out, he would be sent down to the coast to quell them, whereas if Miletus made no movement, he didn't see a chance of his ever again returning thither. Such then were the views which led Histiaeus to dispatch his messenger, and it so chanced that all these several motives to revolt were brought to bear upon Aristagoras at one and the same time. Accordingly, at this juncture Aristagoras held a council of his trusty friends, and laid the business before them, telling them both what he had himself purposed, and what message had been sent him by Histiaeus. At this council all his friends were of the same way of thinking, and recommended revolt, except only Herodotus the historian. He, first of all, advised them by all means to avoid engaging in war with the king of the Persians, whose might he set forth, and whose subject nations he enumerated. As, however, he couldn't induce them to listen to this counsel, he next advised them that they should do all that lay in their power to make themselves masters of the sea. There was one only way, he said, so far as he could see, of their succeeding in this. Miletus was, he knew, a weak state, but if the treasures in the temple of the Branchidae, which Croesus the Lydian gave to it, were seized, he had strong hopes that the mastery of the sea might be thereby gained. At least it would give them money to begin the war, and would save the treasures from falling into the hands of the enemy. Now these treasures were of very great value, as I showed in the first part of my history. The assembly, however, rejected the counsel of Herodotus, while nevertheless they resolved upon a revolt. One of their number, it was agreed, should sail to Meus, where the fleet had been lying since its return from Naxos, and endeavour to seize the captains who had gone there with the vessels. Eatragoras accordingly was dispatched on this errand, and he took with guile Oleatus, the son of Ubanolis, the Milesian, and Histiaeus, the son of Timnes, the Temerian, Coes, likewise the son of Erxander, to whom Darius gave Mytilene, and Aristagoras, the son of Heraclides, the Chemian, and also many others. Thus Aristagoras revolted openly from Darius, and now he set to work to scheme against him in every possible way. First of all, in order to induce the Milesians to join heartily in the revolt, he gave out that he laid down his own lordship over Miletus, and in lieu thereof established a commonwealth. After which, throughout all Ionia he did the like. For from some of the cities he drove out their tyrants, and to others, whose goodwill he hoped thereby to gain, he handed theirs over, thus giving up all the men whom he had seized at the Naxian fleet, each to the city whereto he belonged. Now the Mytileneans had no sooner got Coes into their power than they led him forth from the city and stoned him. The Chemians, on the other hand, allowed their tyrant to go free, as likewise did most of the others, and so this form of government ceased throughout all the cities. Aristagoras the Milesian, after he had in this way put down the tyrants and bidden the cities choose themselves captains in their room, sailed away himself on board a trireme to Lacedaemon, for he had great need of obtaining the aid of some powerful ally. At Sparta, Anaxandridas, the son of Leo, was no longer king. He had died, and his son Cleomenes had mounted the throne, not, however, by right of merit, but of birth. Anaxandridas took to wife his own sister's daughter, and was tenderly attached to her, but no children came from the marriage. Hereupon the ephors called him before them, and said, If thou hast no care for thine own self, nevertheless we cannot allow this, nor suffer the race of Eristhenes to die out from among us. Come then, as thy present wife bears thee no children, put her away, and wed another. So wilt thou do what is well-pleasing to the Spartans. Anaxandridas, however, refused to do as they required, and said it was no good advice the ephors gave to bid him put away his wife when she had done no wrong, and take to himself another. He therefore declined to obey them. Then the ephors and elders took counsel together, and laid this proposal before the king. Since thou art so fond, as we see thee to be, of thy present wife, do what we now advise, and gainsay us not, lest the Spartans make some unwonted decree concerning thee. We ask thee not now to put away thy wife to whom thou art married. Give her still the same love and honour as ever, but take thee another wife beside, who may bear thee children. When he heard this offer, Anaxandridas gave way, and henceforth he lived with 2 wives in 2 separate houses, quite against all Spartan custom. In a short time the wife whom he had last married bore him a son, who received the name of Cleomenes, and so the heir to the throne was brought into the world by her. After this the first wife also, who in time past had been barren, by some strange chance conceived, and came to be with child. Then the friends of the second wife, when they heard a rumour of the truth, made a great stir, and said it was a false boast, and she meant, they were sure, to bring forward as her own a supposititious child. So they raised an outcry against her, and therefore when her full time was come, the ephors, who were themselves incredulous, sat round her bed, and kept a strict watch on the labour. At this time then she bore Dorieus, and after him quickly Leonidas, and after him again quickly Cleombrotus. Some even say that Leonidas and Cleombrotus were twins. On the other hand, the second wife, the mother of Cleomenes, who was a daughter of Prinatadas, the son of Demarminus, never gave birth to a second child. Now Cleomenes, it said, was not right in his mind. Indeed, he verged on madness, while Dorieus surpassed all his co-mates and looked confidently to receiving the kingdom on the score of merit. When, therefore, after the death of Anaxandridas, the Spartans kept to the law, and made Cleomenes, his eldest son, king in his room, Dorieus, who had imagined that he should be chosen, and who couldn't bear the thought of having such a man as Cleomenes to rule over him, asked the Spartans to give him a body of men, and left Sparta with them in order to found a colony. However, he neither took counsel of the oracle at Delphi as to the place whereto he should go, nor observed any of the customary usages, but left Sparta in dudgeon, and sailed away to Libya under the guidance of certain men who were Therians. These men brought him to Knips, where he colonized a spot which hasn't its equal in all Libya, on the banks of a river. But from this place he was driven in the 3rd year by the Maesians, the Libyans, and the Carthaginians. Dorieus returned to the Peloponnese, whereupon Antichares, the Eleonian, gave him a counsel which he got from the oracles of Laius, to found the city of Heraclea in Sicily. The whole country of Eryx belonged, he said, to the Heracleids, since Heracles himself conquered it. On receiving this advice, Dorieus went to Delphi to inquire of the oracle whether he should take the place to which he was about to go. The Pythonius prophesied that he would, whereupon Dorieus went back to Libya, took up the men who had sailed with him at the first, and proceeded on his way along the shores of Italy. Just at this time the Sybarites say they and their king Tellus were about to make war upon Crotona, and the Crotoniates, greatly alarmed, besought Dorieus to lend them aid. Dorieus was prevailed upon, bore part in the war against Sybaris, and had a share in taking the town. Such is the account which the Sybarites give of what was done by Dorieus and his companions. The Crotoniates, on the other hand, maintain that no foreigner lent them aid in their war against the Sybarites save and except Callias the Elean, a soothsayer of the race of the Iamidai, and he only forsook Tellus the Sybaritic king and deserted to their side when he found on sacrificing that the victims were not favourable to an attack on Crotona. Such is the account which each party gives of these matters. Both parties likewise adduce testimonies to the truth of what they say. The Sybarites show a temple and sacred precinct near the dry stream of the Crastis, which they declare that Dorieus, after taking their city, dedicated to Athena Crastias. And further, they bring forward the death of Dorieus as the surest proof, since he fell, they say, because he disobeyed the oracle. For had he in nothing varied from the directions given him, but confined himself to the business on which he was sent, he would assuredly have conquered the Erysian territory and kept possession of it, instead of perishing with all his followers. The Crotoniates, on the other hand, point to the numerous allotments within their borders which were assigned to Callias the Elean by their countrymen, and which, to my day, remained in the possession of his family, while Dorieus and his descendants, they remark, possess nothing. Yet if Dorieus had really helped them in the Sybaritic war, he would have received very much more than Callias. Such are the testimonies which are adduced on either side. It's open to every man to adopt whichever view he deems the best. Certain Spartans accompanied Dorieus on his voyage as co-founders, to wit, Thessalus, Peribates, Callias, and Eurylion. These men and all the troops under their command reached Sicily, but there they fell in a battle wherein they were defeated by the Egestians and Phoenicians, only one, Eurylion, surviving the disaster. He then, collecting the remnants of the beaten army, made himself master of Minoa, the Seleucian colony, and helped the Seleucians to throw off the yoke of their tyrant Pythagoras. Having upset Pythagoras, he sought to become tyrant in his room, and even reigned at Selinus for a brief space, but after a while the Seleucians rose up in revolt against him, and though he fled to the altar of Zeus Agorius, they notwithstanding put him to death. Another man who accompanied Dorieus and died with him was Philip, the son of Butacidas, a man of Crotona, who, after he had been betrothed to a daughter of Tellus the Sybarite, was banished from Crotona, whereupon his marriage came to naught, and he in his disappointment took ship and sailed to Cyrene. From thence he became a follower of Dorieus, furnishing to the fleet a trireme of his own, a crew of which he supported at his own charge. This Philip was an Olympian victor, and the handsomest Greek of his day. His beauty gained him honours at the hands of the Egestians, which they never accorded to anyone else, for they raised a hero temple over his grave, and they still worship him with sacrifices. Such then was the end of Dorieus, who, if he had brooked the rule of Cleomenes and remained in Sparta, would have been king of Lacedaemon, since Cleomenes, after reigning no great length of time, died without male offspring, leaving behind him an only daughter, by name Gorgo. Cleomenes, however, was still king when Aristagoras, tyrant of Miletus, reached Sparta. At their interview, Aristagoras, according to the report of the Lacedaemonians, produced a bronze tablet, whereupon the whole circuit of the earth was engraved, with all its seas and rivers. Discourse began between the two, and Aristagoras addressed the Spartan king in these words following: "Think it not strange, O King Cleomenes, that I have been at the pains to sail hither, for the posture of affairs, which I will now recount unto thee, made it fitting. Shame and grief is it indeed to none so much as to us, that the sons of the Ionians should have lost their freedom, and come to be the slaves of others. But yet it touches you likewise, O Spartans, beyond the rest of the Greeks, inasmuch as the preeminence over all Greece appertains to you. We beseech you, therefore, by the common gods of the Grecians, deliver the Ionians, who are your own kinsmen, from slavery. Truly the task isn't difficult, for the barbarians are an unwarlike people, and you are the best and bravest warriors in the whole world. Their mode of fighting is the following. They use bows and arrows and a short spear. They wear trousers in the field and cover their heads with turbans. So easy are they to vanquish. Know, too, that the dwellers in these parts have more good things than all the rest of the world put together, gold and silver and brass and embroidered garments, beasts of burthen and bondservants, all which, if you only wish it, you may soon have for your own. The nations border on one another, in the order which I will now explain. Next to these Ionians, here he pointed with his finger to the map of the world, which was engraved upon the tablet which he had brought with him, these Lydians dwell. Their soil is fertile, and few people are so rich in silver. Next to them, he continued, come these Phrygians, who have more flocks and herds than any race that I know, and more plentiful harvests. On them border the Cappadocians, whom we Greeks know by the name of Syrians. They are neighbours to the Cilicians, who extend all the way to this sea, where Cyprus, the island which you see here, lies. The Cilicians pay the king a yearly tribute of 500 talents. Next to them come the Armenians, who live here. They too have numerous flocks and herds. After them come the Mattiani, inhabiting this country. Then Kysia, this province, where you see the river Coaspes marked, and likewise the town Susa upon its banks, where the great king holds his court, and where the treasuries are in which his wealth is stored. Once masters of this city, you may be bold to vie with Zeus himself for riches. In the wars which ye wage with your rivals of Messenia, with them of Argos, likewise, and of Arcadia, about paltry boundaries and strips of land not so remarkably good, ye contend with those who have no gold, nor silver even, which often give men heart to fight and die. Must ye wage such wars? And when ye might so easily be lords of Asia, will ye decide otherwise? Thus spoke Aristagoras, and Cleomenes replied to him, Milesian, stranger, 3 days hence I will give thee an answer. And so they proceeded no further at that time. When, however, the day appointed for the answer came, and the two once more met, Cleomenes asked Aristagoras how many days' journey it was from the sea of the Ionians to the king's residence. Hereupon Aristagoras, who had managed the rest so cleverly, and succeeded in deceiving the king, tripped in his speech and blundered, for instead of conceding the truth, as he ought to have done if he wanted to induce the Spartans to cross into Asia, he said plainly that it was a journey of 3 months. Cleomenes caught at the words, and preventing Aristagoras from finishing what he had begun to say concerning the road, addressed him thus, Milesian stranger, quit Sparta before sunset. This is no good proposal that thou makest to the Lacedaemonians, to conduct them a distance of 3 months' journey from the sea. When he had thus spoken, Cleomenes went to his home. But Aristagoras took an olive bough in his hand, and hastened to the king's house, where he was admitted by reason of his suppliant's guise. Gorgo, the daughter of Cleomenes, and his only child, a girl of about 8 or 9 years of age, happened to be there, standing by her father's side. Aristagoras, seeing her, requested Cleomenes to send her out of the room before he began to speak with him. But Cleomenes told him to stay on, and not mind the child. So Aristagoras began with a promise of 10 talents if the king would grant him his request, and when Cleomenes shook his head, continued to raise his offer till it reached 50 talents. Whereupon the child spoke. Father, she said, get up and go, or the stranger will certainly corrupt thee. Then Cleomenes, pleased at the warning of his child, withdrew and went into another room. Aristagoras quitted Sparta for good, not being able to discourse any more concerning the road which led up to the king. Now the true account of the road in question is the following. Royal stations exist along its whole length, and excellent caravansaries, and throughout It traverses an inhabited tract and is free from danger. In Lydia and Phrygia there are 20 stations within a distance of 94.5 parasangs. On leaving Phrygia, the Halys has to be crossed, and here are gates, through which you must needs pass ere you can traverse the stream. A strong force guards this post. When you've made the passage and are come into Cappadocia, 28 stations and 104 parasangs bring you to the borders of Cilicia, where the road passes through 2 sets of gates, at each of which there is a guard posted. Leaving these behind, you go on through Cilicia, where you find 3 stations in a distance of 15.5 parasangs. The boundary between Cilicia and Armenia is the river Euphrates, which is necessary to cross in boats. In Armenia, the resting places are 15 in number, and the distance is 56.5 parasangs. There's one place where a guard is posted. 4 large streams intersect this district, all of which have to be crossed by means of boats. The first of these is the Tigris. The second and the third have both of them the same name, though they're not only different rivers, but don't even run from the same place. For the one which I've called the first of the 2 has its source in Armenia, while the other flows afterwards out of the country of the Mantineans. The fourth of the streams is called the Gindis, and this is the river which Cyrus dispersed by digging for it 360 channels. Leaving Armenia and entering the Mantinean country, you have 4 stations. These passed, you find yourself in Kissia, where 11 stations and 42.5 parasangs bring you to another navigable stream, the Coaspes, on the banks of which the city of Susa is built. Thus the entire number of the stations is raised to 111, and so many are in fact the resting places that one finds between Sardis and Susa. If then the royal road be measured aright, and the parasang equals as it does 30 furlongs, the whole distance from Sardis to the palace of Memnon, as it's called, amounting thus to 450 parasangs, would be 13,500 furlongs. Travelling then at the rate of 150 furlongs a day, one will take exactly 90 days to perform the journey. Thus, when Aristagoras the Milesian told Cleomenes the Lacedaemonian that it was a 3 months' journey from the sea up to the king, he said no more than the truth. The exact distance, if anyone desires still greater accuracy, is somewhat more, for the journey from Ephesus to Sardis must be added to the foregoing account, and this will make the whole distance between the Greek Sea and Susa, or the city of Memnon as it's called, 14,040 furlongs, since Ephesus is distant from Sardis 540 furlongs. This would add 3 days to the 3 months' journey. When Aristagoras left Sparta, he hastened to Athens, which had got quit of its tyrants in the way that I'll now describe. After the death of Hipparchus, the son of Pisistratus and brother of the tyrant Hippias, who, in spite of the clear warning he had received concerning his fate in a dream, was slain by Harmodius and Aristogeiton, men both of the race of the Gephyrians, the oppression of the Athenians continued by the space of 4 years, and they gained nothing but were worse used than before. Now the dream of Hipparchus was the following. The night before the Panathenaic festival, he thought he saw in his sleep a tall and beautiful man, who stood over him and read him the following riddle. Bear thou unbearable woes with the all-bearing heart of a lion. Never be sure shall wrongdoer escape the reward of wrongdoing. As soon as day dawned, he sent and submitted his dream to the interpreters, after which he offered the averting sacrifices, and then went and led the procession in which he perished. The family of the Gephyrians, to which the murderers of Hipparchus belonged, according to their own account, came originally from Eritrea. My inquiries, however, have made it clear to me that they were in reality Phoenicians, descendants of those who came with Cadmus into the country now called Boeotia. Here they received for their portion the district of Tanagra, in which they afterwards dwelt. On their expulsion from this country by the Boeotians, which happened some time after that of the Cadmeans, from the same parts by the Argives, they took refuge at Athens. The Athenians received them among their citizens upon set terms, whereby they were excluded from a number of privileges which aren't worth mentioning. Now the Phoenicians who came with Cadmus, and to whom the Gephyrii belonged, introduced into Greece upon their arrival a great variety of arts, among the rest that of writing, whereof the Greeks till then had, as I think, been ignorant. And originally they shaped their letters exactly like all the other Phoenicians, but afterwards, in course of time, they changed by degrees their language, and together with it the form likewise of their characters. Now the Greeks who dwelt about those parts at that time were chiefly the Ionians. The Phoenician letters were accordingly adopted by them, but with some variation in the shape of a few, and so they arrived at the present use, still calling the letters Phoenician, as justice required, after the name of those who were the first to introduce them into Greece. Paper rolls also were called from of old parchments by the Ionians, because formerly, when paper was scarce, they used instead the skins of sheep and goats, on which material many of the barbarians are even now wont to write. I myself saw Cadmean characters engraved upon some tripods in the temple of Apollo Ismenias in Boeotian Thebes, most of them shaped like the Ionian. One of the tripods has the inscription following, "Me did Amphitryon place, from the far Teleboans coming." This would be about the age of Laius, the son of Labdacus, the son of Polydorus, the son of Cadmus. Another of the tripods has this legend in the hexameter measure, "I to far-shooting Phoebus was offered by Scius the boxer, when he had won at the games a wondrous beautiful offering." This might be Scius, the son of Hippocoon, and the tripod, if dedicated by him and not by another of the same name, would belong to the time of Oedipus, the son of Laius. The third tripod has also an inscription in hexameters, which runs thus, "King Laodamas gave this tripod to far-seeing Phoebus, when he was set on the throne, a wondrous beautiful offering." It was in the reign of this Laodamas, the son of Eteocles, that the Cadmeans were driven by the Argives out of their country and found a shelter with the Enkelians. The Gephyrians at that time remained in the country, but afterwards they retired before the Boeotians and took refuge at Athens, where they have a number of temples for their separate use, which the other Athenians aren't allowed to enter. Among the rest, one of Achaean Demeter, in whose honour they likewise celebrate special orgies. Having thus related the dream which Hipparchus saw, and traced the descent of the Gephyrians, the family whereto his murderers belonged, I must proceed with the matter whereof I was intending before to speak, to wit, the way in which the Athenians got quit of their tyrants. Upon the death of Hipparchus, Hippias, who was king, grew harsh towards the Athenians. And the Alcmeonidae, an Athenian family which had been banished by the Pisistratidae, joined the other exiles and endeavoured to procure their own return and to free Athens by force. They seized and fortified Lipsydrium above Paeonia and tried to gain their object by arms. But great disasters befell them, and their purpose remained unaccomplished. They therefore resolved to shrink from no contrivance that might bring them success, and accordingly they contracted with the Amphictyons to build the temple which now stands at Delphi, but which in those days did not exist. Having done this, they proceeded, being men of great wealth and members of an ancient and distinguished family, to build the temple much more magnificently than the plan obliged to them. Besides other improvements, instead of the coarse stone whereof by the contract the temple was to have been constructed, they made the facings of Parian marble. These same men, if we may believe the Athenians, during their stay at Delphi, persuaded the Pythoness by a bribe to tell the Spartans, whenever any of them came to consult the oracle, either on their own private affairs or on the business of the state, that they must free Athens. So the Lacedaemonians, when they found no answer ever returned to them but this, sent at last Anchimelius, the son of Astor, a man of note among their citizens, at the head of an army against Athens, with orders to drive out the Pisistratidae, albeit they were bound to them by the closest ties of friendship, for they esteemed the things of heaven more highly than the things of men. The troops went by sea and were conveyed in transports. Anchimolius brought them to an anchorage at Phalerum, and there the men disembarked. But the Pisistratidae, who had previous knowledge of their intentions, had sent to Thessaly, between which country and Athens there was an alliance, with a request for aid. The Thessalians, in reply to their entreaties, sent them by a public vote 1,000 horsemen, under the command of their king, Cineas, who was a Conniaean. When this help came, the Pisistratidae laid their plan accordingly. They cleared the whole plain about Phalerum so as to make it fit for the movements of cavalry, and then charged the enemy's camp with their horse, which fell with such fury upon the Lacedaemonians as to kill numbers, among the rest Anchimolius, the general, and to drive the remainder to their ships. Such was the fate of the first army sent from Lacedaemon, and the tomb of Anchimolius may be seen to this day in Attica. It's at Alopicae, Foxtown, near the temple of Heracles in Kinosargos. Afterwards, the Lacedaemonians dispatched a larger force against Athens, which they put under the command of Cleomenes, son of Anaxandridas, one of their kings. These troops were not sent by sea, but marched by the mainland. When they were coming to Attica, their first encounter was with the Thessalian horse, which they shortly put to flight, killing above 40 men. The remainder made good their escape and fled straight to Thessaly. Cleomenes proceeded to the city, and with the aid of such of the Athenians as wished for freedom, besieged the tyrants who had shut themselves up in the Pelasgic fortress. And now there had been small chance of the Pisistratidae falling into the hands of the Spartans, who didn't even design to sit down before the place, which had moreover been well provisioned beforehand with stores both of meat and drink. Nay, it's likely that after a few days' blockade the Lacedaemonians would have quitted Attica altogether and gone back to Sparta, had not an event occurred most unlucky for the besieged and most advantageous for the besiegers. The children of the Pisistratidae were made prisoners as they were being removed out of the country. By this calamity all their plans were deranged, and as the ransom of their children they consented to the demands of the Athenians and agreed within 5 days' time to quit Attica. Accordingly, they soon afterwards left the country and withdrew to Sigeum on the Scamander, after reigning 36 years over the Athenians. By descent they were Pylians of the family of the Nereids, to which Codrus and Melanthus likewise belonged, men who in former times from foreign settlers became kings of Athens. And hence it was that Hippocrates came to think of calling his son Pisistratus. He named him after the Pisistratus who was a son of Nestor. Such then was the mode in which the Athenians got quit of their tyrants. What they did and suffered worthy of note from the time when they gained their freedom until the revolt of Ionia from King Darius, and the coming of Aristagoras to Athens, with a request that the Athenians would lend the Ionians aid, I shall now proceed to relate. The power of Athens had been great before, but now that the tyrants were gone, it became greater than ever. The chief authority was lodged with 2 persons, Cleisthenes of the family of the Alcmaeonids, who is said to have been the persuader of the Pythoness, and Isagoras, the son of Tisander, who belonged to a noble house, but whose pedigree I am not able to trace further, howbeit his kinsmen offer sacrifice to the Carian Zeus. These 2 men strove together for the mastery, and Cleisthenes, finding himself the weaker, called to his aid the common people. Hereupon, instead of the 4 tribes among which the Athenians had been divided hitherto, Cleisthenes made 10 tribes, and parcelled out the Athenians among them. He likewise changed the names of the tribes, for whereas they had till now been called after Gelion, Aigicares, Argades, and Hoples, the 4 sons of Ion, Cleisthenes set these names aside and called his tribes after certain other heroes, all of whom were native, except Ajax. Ajax was associated because, although a foreigner, he was a neighbor and an ally of Athens. My belief is that in acting thus, he did but imitate his maternal grandfather, Cleisthenes, king of Sicyon. This king, when he was at war with Argos, put an end to the contests of the rhapsodists at Sicyon, because in the Homeric hymns, Argos and the Argives were so constantly the theme of song. He likewise conceived the wish to drive Adrastus, the son of Teleus, out of his country, seeing that he was an Argive hero. For Adrastus had a shrine at Sicyon, which yet stands in the marketplace of the town. Cleisthenes therefore went to Delphi and asked the oracle if he might expel Adrastus. To this the Pythoness is reported to have answered, "Adrastus is the Sicyonians' king, but thou art only a robber." So when the god wouldn't grant his request, he went home and began to think how he might contrive to make Adrastus withdraw of his own accord. After a while he hit upon a plan which he thought would succeed. He sent envoys to Thebes in Boeotia and informed the Thebans that he wished to bring Melanippus, the son of Astacus, to Sicyon. The Thebans consenting, Cleisthenes carried Melanippus back with him, assigned him a precinct within the government house, and built him a shrine there in the safest and strongest part. The reason for his so doing, which I mustn't forbear to mention, was because Melanippus was Adrastus's great enemy, having slain both his brother Megistes and his son-in-law Tydeus. Cleisthenes, after assigning the precinct to Melanippus, took away from Adrastus the sacrifices and festivals wherewith he had till then been honoured, and transferred them to his adversary. Hitherto the Sicyonians had paid extraordinary honours to Adrastus because the country had belonged to Polybus, and Adrastus was Polybus's daughter's son, whence it came to pass that Polybus, dying childless, left Adrastus his kingdom. Besides other ceremonies, it had been their wont to honour Adrastus with tragic choruses, which they assigned to him rather than Dionysus, on account of his calamities. Cleisthenes now gave the choruses to Dionysus, transferring to Melanippus the rest of the sacred rites.